So, everyone, today we have the immense opportunity to talk to Wendy Kopp, who has got such an enormous array of experience in education, having founded an organization which has had massive impact for a very long time. We are going to talk about education and what it means today, because there is a lot of thinking going into how do we raise our kids? What should we be thinking about? We're investing a lot in it, and we're hoping we're doing the right thing. But I feel like, Wendy, you're going to have a bunch of views that are going to help us with that. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with your backstory, which goes all the way back to a paper or papers that you wrote when you were in college, which led to an organization which you've been pioneering ever since. I won't say much more than that, but what is the Wendy backstory?
Yes, I feel very lucky to have come to this idea when I was a college senior at Princeton University, and I was just confused about why all these promising leaders, as they thought of us, were being recruited so heavily to work in banks and consulting firms. I mean, which is great if that's what you really want to do, but I felt like our generation was just searching for a way to address the inequities in our country. And I thought, how come we're not being recruited as aggressively to commit 2 years to teach in our country's low-income communities? And I became very obsessed by that idea. I needed to write a thesis and decided to propose this idea in my thesis. And it's kept me busy ever since. It ultimately led to the launch of Teach for America. And I really had my head down, just fully focused on making Teach for America bigger and better in the US, until there was just something in the water. And starting about 20 years ago, I started meeting people all over the world who were just determined that something similar needed to happen in their countries. And that's what ultimately led to the launch of Teach for All, which is now a network of organizations from Teach for Australia to, Teach for Nigeria, to Teach for India, to the next one, who are all share a common purpose and approach to kind of cultivating the collective leadership we need to ensure that one day all kids have the chance to attain an excellent education.
When you had this original idea about being able to go and teach, I think we all, I hope most of us, get to a point in our careers where we realize that all of our life's insight and all of our life's work could be best placed in some kind of paying it forward of knowledge, some kind of education. I'm just curious to go back to the kernel of that first idea, because, we have a whole range of different mechanisms, I guess, for people who are coming out of college, or people who frankly don't go to college, looking for something to do when they finish school. Things like the national services, like going to the Peace Corps, things that in the US are quite unique versus in other countries. And I'm wondering, was there a model like that you had in your mind when you mentioned about, being able to teach for 2 years in other communities? Was that kind of the model you sort of envisaged before you even got started with this?
So this was, I'm going to really date myself. I mean, this is 1989. Our generation was called the me generation. People were convinced that every last one of us wanted to just enrich ourselves. And that label did not strike me as accurate. Like, I felt like, actually, no, that does not describe our generation. Like, I felt like I was one of thousands of people just searching for a way to do something to address the real issues in society. And I personally just couldn't figure out how to do it. There was the Peace Corps. You had to be, at that time, able to wait several months and, wait and see if you could get a job. I mean, I needed a job. Like, I needed to have a salary right after I graduated. So what I realized was, the issue isn't the generation, it's the recruiters. They are all banks and consulting firms, which is, again, not to make them the demons, but those were the options. Like, they were just banging down our doors saying, just commit 2 years. And our generation thought, we don't know what to do, but I guess we'll do that. We'll learn a lot, and then we'll go on and do something else. But I knew a bunch of upperclassmen and I saw what was happening. Like they were committing just 2 years. And then that would, of course, inform the next step. They'd go to business school, they'd go back into those firms. And that really was at the core of this idea. Like we could change the consciousness of a whole generation by getting the real leaders to first commit 2 years to teach in low income communities. Like, what would that do for people's ultimate priorities and values? And honestly, that's exactly what I then watched play itself out in the early years of Teach for America. And what I've seen now, it's the same movie playing all over the world. Those 2 years are so transformational and they really shape who you become. And they help create the leaders we need, some who will stay in the classroom and many who will take on the other issues that are really at the roots of the inequities and the kind of what's not right about today's system, essentially.
You know, it's funny, we sort of go from the late 90s, catapult ourselves into, 2025. And it feels as though, and this is, from a father of girls who are still making sense. They're quite young, 10 and 12. They're still making sense of the big issues, but the big issues, they have a way of expressing how deep they feel those issues are to them, their lifestyle, their friends, their cohorts, in a way which I never had a clue about at the same age. And so the inequity, I think, is being felt earlier in people's lives where they have a language to express how worried they are about where this could be going, as we are as adults. But having an opportunity like this feels like something quite unique. I'm wondering how, if we were to walk into Teach for any one of the Teach for All offices, what would we find as we walked in there, given the philosophy and given the kind of shared mission that happens across this? And we'll get to partnership shortly, but I'm just very curious about how people could tap into that opportunity, knowing that at a very young age, I think people would go, 2 years, no problem. That sounds fine, because I'm not sure I have many other options. But when you were at that age, there wasn't this option. So what would we experience if we walked into a Teach for All kind of office or into the organization itself?
Yeah. I mean, so all of these organizations, I mean, I was just visiting Teach for Nigeria and then Teach for Pakistan, and then our network partner in France, which is called Le Choix de l'École, and then Teach for Portugal. I mean, every one of them is essentially working to build a movement among some of the most promising leaders in their countries. So people who, they may be engineers and political science majors and the next, and they're saying, commit 2 years to teach in the most marginalized communities in our country as a way of contributing to kids growing up today, and gaining the kind of insight and commitment and networks that will be with you the rest of your life as you work together with many others to tackle this issue that's very systemic in its roots. So that's, and it's really what we've seen through this is that those teachers make a real difference. I mean, they're working alongside many other teachers, many of them incredibly committed people, right? Who we need every additional person we can find who wants to teach in the most marginalized communities, who's willing to throw everything they've got into the work to meet their kids' extra needs, to, make up for all the challenges in the system. But what we all know is that heroic teachers alone is not enough. Ultimately, we do need to get at the roots. We need people changing the way schools are designed, changing the way the curriculum is, taking pressure off the schools in the first place. And what you learn during those 2 years leads you to realize just how big and complex this is. And it turns them into change agents. And some decide, I'm going to make this my life's work, teaching in these contexts. And some decide, I'm going to go start a new school or become a school principal and turn this school around. Or I'm going to work in the government ministry and just change the way the whole curriculum reads, or the way technology is leveraged, or the way teachers are trained, or school principals are trained. Or, you know what, I'm going to start an advocacy organization so that we can change the policies that keep this thing in place. So that's kind of what you would find. And I'm just, it is amazing to see. I mean, really, like those effects playing themselves out no matter where. I mean, there's 64 countries in the world that have Teach
Mm.
for All organizations, and that's what each and every one of them are working to generate.
There is incredible diversity amongst those 64 countries, but all born together by the idea of kids require and are entitled to a great education and a start. That shared mission is usually pretty difficult to come by when you're not outside, or when you're outside an organization which is not like yours, like a military organization, like a first responder organization, where the mission is very clear. When you think about how to bring this kind of idea to people who are completely new, what's the pitch for them if they've not really had that exposure, where they do
Yeah.
have the idea of, I can go and work for a consulting firm. Again, not to, it's a great track, but if there was other options they had available to them, what is the pitch that Teach for All is giving them in order for the light bulb to go off and for them to go, you know what, this could be the greatest 2 years of my entire life, even though I've only lived 20 of them so far?
Yeah. I mean, each of these organizations, I mean, there's a grand experiment, like, lots of experimentation around how do we enlist this next generation? People are trying different messages. But I would just say, I mean, what I've come to think is the main message is this is the path of no regrets. Like, if you want to live a life of meaning, I'm just trying to think of what you could possibly do straight out of college or early in your career trajectory that has the potential for greater impact and greater leadership. Like, you are the person within the four walls of your classroom, and the sky's the limit. Like, it's all about, can you enlist your kids and their families on a mission to get on a different trajectory through the power of education? I mean, this is an incredible leadership opportunity. And at the same time, it's an opportunity to basically work together with so many others who are drawn by the same values and to the same purpose. And you're going to work together with those people the rest of your life. And no matter what else you do, and you may decide, I'm going to go, work in XYZ profession, or, it could be anything, but always you're going to be part of this group of people saying, how do we get at the bigger systemic changes that we need to see to enable all kids to have an equal shot and an equal chance to fulfill their potential?
I love it. So let's talk about how the growth story of this organization took effect from a paper to 64 countries. We can say that, but there's been a bunch of years, and I'm sure thousands, countless conversations and tussles, negotiations, reworking of the value proposition that you were trying to put out into the world. How has the organization grown?
So interestingly, I mean, I think we went about this in a, I guess, relatively unique way in the world. And I mean, again, I think we have to go back to the origin of the global part of this journey, because, I had my head down and I was very overwhelmed as a social entrepreneur working to scale alongside many others, Teach for America. I wasn't thinking about the rest of the world at all. And in fact, we were in the midst of a big effort that in fact, did generate a lot of growth of Teach for America. So we just started meeting people who had run into really the alumni of Teach for America. Like,
Right.
Maybe they were in a grad school and they realized, where are all these people at Harvard Law School who all taught in urban and rural America and are like at the top of the class? Like, what is this? Like, how do you get some of the most promising people to actually teach in low-income communities? We need to do that in Chile. Or, when one of the more pivotal examples was an incredible social entrepreneur in India who was running very transformational after-school programs for kids, and met some of the Teach for America alumni who were volunteering in her centers. And she's like, where'd you all come from? I need more of you. And they said, well, we did Teach for America. She's like, we need Teach for India. I mean, how do we get more people like this?
Mm.
So people had an idea, like they understood, like they wanted this in their countries. I knew, I mean, if someone had been in India or Chile trying to start Teach for America, I mean, no path. So I knew, like, I wasn't going to start these organizations in their countries. So it was just very intuitive that we could build a network. I mean, in fact, my first thought was go for it. I mean, start it, right? Like,
Mm.
they were looking for help and support. I was sort of questioning, I don't know, what's the value in that? Like, but I went and visited actually the social entrepreneur in India. And on that visit, she was very persuasive. She's like, you have to come to India. So I spent a week there. And I realized in that week how many similarities there were. I mean, as different as the culture and the context are. I mean, it's so different. But we would go on school visits and I'd realize, wow, like the circumstances facing the most marginalized kids here are so similar to the circumstances facing them in the US. Or, at multiple levels, like we'd go on a college campus and try to see if this would resonate among college students. And I would just realize we're having the same conversation. So I realized on that visit, it would be really short-sighted not to do this in a way that would enable us to all learn from each other. So at that point, I mean, so that's really what led us to say, let's pursue this. We will launch a network with independent, locally led organizations and a global organization that will help everyone learn from each other.
The instinct you had there is one which I think a lot of people struggle with across the partnerships idea. And it's the one of instinct and the surprise when approaching somebody else, hoping that they might have some resonance with the shared mission that you've not even yet expressed. And then all of a sudden it's, no, I'm on the same page. We've established a language almost subliminally, and now we're ready to go. I think many get, if you're not willing to catch that idea back, and often always in pitching mode, the idea of receiving it back quickly is like, oh, it's a bit of a shock. And the idea of going to network first to allow there for the idea to sort of breathe and actually get some life is actually usually not as difficult as people might first think, because at its most fundamental, a network is just an exchange of people, and you just want to hope that you can put some more oxygen in it to make it grow. I imagine that was not a dissimilar experience you had right around the world as you started to jump from country to country having these conversations, right?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this journey challenged, I mean, it really led me to unlearn everything I thought I knew about how to scale something. I mean, we scaled Teach for America a lot, right? Like it went from being a $10 million organization in 13 communities in our 10th year with 1,000 teachers to being, in 60 communities, a $300+ million organization with 6,000 plus teachers. That scaling journey, I mean, I learned a lot about how to scale something with quality, but we didn't do that through a network approach. We did that through a much more centralized approach. So in a way, I was really scared to take this network approach globally, because I thought, I know how hard it is to scale something with quality. Like, this could be just a mess. I just couldn't figure out how else to do it, given the diversity of the world. So anyway, we launched, and I did so with a lot of trepidation, honestly. And then within a couple years realized, wow, like this is way surpassing my expectations. Like, those local leaders were making it better. And we were realizing we really can have much more impact because there are all these brilliant people in their countries, all united by the same big idea, but also informed by very different cultures and contexts. And that generates innovation. And we can spread those innovations. Like, it just really accelerated the learning curve.
So in the Australian context, we're a small country, 24 and a half, 25 million people. what I think a lot of people looking in at the US often don't realize is that if you were to come from another country into the US, wanting to, in inverted commas, scale into the United States, you're usually scaling into 50 plus countries. It's not something which is just the United States, because it's quite unique in its makeup. When you say that, you did the scaling for Teach for America, I don't think that's any small feat, given just how unique each of the different states are. At least here, the curriculums for education through early childhood, they try to be broadly consistent, but there's still a very state-centric approach to, how it's delivered. So people can sort of obviously go between states and there be, good portability in what's been learned, but still has the nuance. I can only imagine jumping from the US, having scaled to the point you've just described, into another country where the context is so different. Were there aspects of what you learned in, say, India or in, say, France or Chile that you were able then to sort of bring back into the States to go, actually, this could be something that is quite helpful, maybe a problem that we were trying to solve that we didn't really have a context or a lens for?
So many. I mean, it didn't even take a year before we started seeing really important pushes and innovations on the particular approach that we were at the time utilizing at Teach for America. So I always give this example because it's the most striking one. But again, Shaheen Mistry, the woman who ended up starting Teach for India, she read Teach for America's training curriculum, teacher training curriculum, and she was so struck by it. She's like, wow, like, how did you figure this out? Because she'd been working for 20 years and had learned so much on the ground. Like, how do you provide a transformational education to the most marginalized kids in India?
Mm-hmm.
And she realized we've learned, I mean, this is the same. So on the one hand, like, that was fascinating, but she took it and she realized, you know what? Like, the balance in the Teach for America training at the time was we were very heavy on knowledge and skills, maybe 90%, versus mindset development, maybe 10%. And she just thought we need more on mindset development. And so the way they did their training, she just recalibrated, and she would engage the teachers, for example, in these very experiential training where they would, do the jobs of the parents of the kids they're about to teach, and then reflect on those experiences. And I mean, just a lot of kind of things that end up really fostering mindset. And I remember visiting their classrooms a year or two in and realizing the percentage of their teachers who are truly transformational, like putting the kids on a different trajectory, is much higher. Teach for America sent 50 teacher trainers over to India in its second year to understand what are they doing. It's just one example. I could give you like hundreds if I really had the time to do it. But it just shows, I think, the power of a network approach. And honestly, my one regret, like if someone said, what would you do differently if you could start Teach for America today? I'd say I'd start it with a network approach. Because to your point, this country over here is so diverse, and it needs the same kind of locally rooted, kind of globally or nationally, at least, informed approach.
The best business developers I know, and it sounds very corporate, but the best ones that I know who genuinely develop relationships to start this, go in knowing that you don't know where it's going to go. And I think that the biggest lesson here, and it's a beautiful context where you can sort of see that mindset approach. And you see that in education today, much, much more so than when I was at school. I'm sure when all of us had sort of looked back at our schooling experiences, there is such a deliberate focus on that. But I'm sure that people that were pioneering that at the time in more conventional education had no idea where it was going to go, but the instinct was quite strong. And as a very human interaction, very human sort of pastime to teach others, I'm so pleased that's played out the way it has, because if we were just picking up textbooks and, you going through version 6 and then version 10, then version 12, I think it would be a vastly different world we'd find ourselves in right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wendy, let's go to one of the partnerships that you've built, and feel free to choose anyone you like. But I'd love to reverse engineer it so that we could go back to the very beginning of how that started, and we can use the network effect you just described before. What is one of the partnerships that sticks in your mind that really changed the game for Teach for All or Teach for America when you were first starting? That helped you realize that actually no, it's real here. There's something here beyond the idea that I had.
Hmm. You know, well, my mind is going all over the place on this question. So you can pull me back if I'm not. But as I think about your focus on this question of partnerships, my mind is actually, I mean, of course, there's a lot of partnership at the core of any successful network, and we could talk about that. But maybe even more important to the way you framed this whole discussion up at the beginning is, what kind of education are we trying to provide to kids? Like one of the great uh, pushes from people all over the world as we got into the development of Teach for All was just the question of what do we mean by an excellent education? And that question ended up leading us to reshape the vision that kind of brings us all together across Teach for All, as we started interrogating that question and asking ourselves, like what are we trying to do in our classrooms? And we came together around a vision of, and equipping kids with the kind of education that will enable them to shape a better future, which that sounds very lofty, but that says a lot, right? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, that means they need to be able to navigate uncertainty, shape meaningful careers in a changing economy, solve these increasingly complex problems that face us all, from environmental degradation to conflict to inequity, et cetera. And at that point we realized, okay, we're going to need to, we don't know how to do that. Like we learned a lot about teachers who move their kids forward a lot academically, but what do we know about teachers who are doing that, fostering the kind of academic skills, the problem solving, critical thinking skills, and are fostering their students' agency and their awareness of the world and their sense of kind of purpose and well-being and their connectedness to people and planet. So we started really interrogating, like, what is at work in classrooms like that? And it led us to a whole set of insights and learnings that are now informing everything we do across Teach for All. But maybe at the heart of what we learned is another form of partnership, which is around partnership with students, like partnership between students and the adults in our education system. There's a lot to this topic, but as we got into this, we realized, our fundamental challenge is, as an education system, is to support all the adults to unlearn how we were taught and how we kind of view the role of a teacher and the role of a student.
Yes.
And it's a huge challenge, but it's the key. It's the key to everything and to reshaping the world. Like, how do we support teachers to see themselves as learners and their students as whole people who can lead today? And if you see classrooms where the teacher's viewing things that way, you realize there is a genuine partnership between the students and the adults in that room. And that's really the key to unlocking the future of education.
I have so many things to talk about on that thread, but I agree with you. The idea of how to learn and unlearn is something that is very, very difficult for humans, and being able to leave an open aperture for there is a different way. This will be very different. I find tends to come from educational in all sectors, but the leaders who are at the top of those organizations acknowledging very openly that is the case, that whatever you think you know, hold on to it. It's certainly not for naught, but there is a new way that we're doing this. And by the way, here's the philosophy by which we are going to bring that forward. We have a number of extraordinary educators in this country. One of them in particular, Bryony Scott, who is the former principal of one of the schools here in Sydney. I remember her saying when I first met her, her opening statement to me was, and to all of us, was that we are running a feminist boot camp. And as soon as she said that, most men in the audience sort of just went, "I'm sorry, I don't know what that means." And then the explanation that followed was one that we hoped we would hear because we were fathers of girls and mothers of girls and carers of girls. And I know that there are many men who are running all boys schools or co-ed schools, or vice versa, women running co-ed schools, who are bringing forward this philosophy that we are here to educate and nurture your kids in a way that probably didn't happen for you. And I'm not here to say sorry for that. It's just different now. And I'm going to add a whole bunch of language and a whole bunch of frameworks to help you walk through that journey. And I have to say, whenever I hear those kind of leaders speak in that kind of form, it is a relief that the evolution has happened in such a short amount of time, right? It was 30 years since I finished high school, and it was one of those areas where I just feel a deep sense of relief. Sadly, I don't feel like that same kind of evolution happens as quickly in business as what we might like to see happen.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, we're really, really puzzling around how to fuel that all over our education systems globally, because we just need to realize, I don't know, just reflecting on the state of the world right now, if we don't reshape what happens in our classrooms today, I fear that we will still be looking at a similar picture in 10, 15, 20 years. And when you think about it that way, you realize as educators, we have the greatest role to play in putting the world on a different trajectory. So the conversation that we're working to spark all across our network and in collaboration with many others well beyond our network is a question of actually purpose. Like, what is the purpose of our education systems? We haven't rethought that question by and large. I mean, there are, of course, the lighthouse schools that are doing something completely different, but for decades, like, these systems were built in a different era, and people show up and do their jobs, well-meaning good people, but we're not interrogating, wait, what are we even trying to accomplish here? And if we can get people really to embrace this idea that what we're trying to accomplish is we're trying to equip students to shape a better future, that suddenly leads you to realize, focusing on narrow academic outcomes alone won't get us there. Like, we will need to foster students' holistic development. And then you can start the journey of saying, okay, so how will we have to see ourselves and see our students and see our communities if we're going to accomplish that? And it'll generate a whole different kind of teaching strategy.
And I do wonder the extent to which a realization that every adult could embrace, which is by default or proxy, we are educators ourselves, like right across the board, whether you have children or not, whether you're 28 years old or 65 years old. Most cultures in the world have an expectation that as you get older, you become an educator in some format. And I do wonder if we miss that sometimes, just in the busyness and all that goes on in our lives, that we maybe not come with that kind of lens. Wendy, tell me, when we sort of think about the ability to grow across different cultures like you've described, and the thriving nature of your organization now, how do you help to maintain the mission focus, given how much innovation can happen at the edges of all these different countries? It feels a little bit like there is a very large ship and you're navigating this very large ship still in a very large ocean. And everyone wants to be on that ship, but you're still trying to keep it on course for what you think is the right thing, which I think is spot on. How do you continue to wrap your arms around and make sure that the mission, the question you're there to answer, keeps on moving as more people are almost magnetized to the vision that you've got?
The first thing we did when we launched Teach for All, the very first thing we did was create a very simple theory of scaling impact globally, which was, it's so simple, but we've rooted every decision in this, which was, it's going to take like local entrepreneurship and leadership plus a global platform that enables those folks to learn from each other. And that is going to lead to exponential impact. Like if you have your head around that, it then informed every single choice we made from, how do we find the people? Like we don't go searching for people to launch. We wait for those people to come to us because then they'll have a different level of ownership. It just informed every single choice. But the next thing we did was say, okay, let's develop, like, what are the principles that need to unite everyone who is in the network? So we developed a set of unifying principles. I think we've only revised them once. There are 10 of them. And they basically lay out, the first of them is a shared purpose and theory of change, vision, and commitment to live into a certain set of values as we work together across the network. The next ones are around the high level of the programmatic approach and the organizational approach. And we prescribe nothing beyond that. You could write those principles on a half piece of paper, but we put a lot of energy into, like, those things must be true, but then the network partner needs to figure out, okay, how do we live into those principles in this country? And then we put a lot into helping everyone learn from each other's choices around exactly how to live into those principles. So I almost think because we prescribe nothing, the unity around those principles is really high. And their hunger, because we're not telling them what to do, to understand what is everyone doing and learning is very high. So I think that's enabled what we have, which is, in fact, a network of 64 organizations that are genuinely, deeply aligned to this particular theory of change and approach.
It's fascinating. Like the parallels to that and being ex-military as well, which is, I think, one of the misnomers of military is what you've described there is, in our context, the commander's intent or the mission intent. The way to execute is really left to the people who are on the ground. But when the intent is clear, the expectation is clear, then many things can happen in order to make that work, providing it obviously operates inside a set of rules. But it is fascinating that happens. I'm not surprised by any means to hear that, by the way, but it's the best organizations often have that philosophy and have also equipped themselves to be able to do that, right? It's one thing to say, look, this is what I want you to do, but it's quite another for a culture to be self-reinforcing like that.
Yeah. Interesting.
When we look ahead, what does the future look like for Teach for All?
We are focused on two big driving priorities. One is to develop more collective leadership everywhere, which means supporting the growth of the network, supporting network partners to scale with quality. We've truly seen, most energy and investment in education is around sort of the technical practices of education, and they're all crucial. We need a lot of energy on them, but we think there's a big missing piece in our efforts to strengthen education systems, which is an investment in, again, as we say, the collective leadership, like the people and their kind of relational capacity. So we want to develop more and more, essentially, a critical mass of change agents everywhere where local leaders think it's important to do, who are just all working together and on a mission to transform education. So that's one big, huge driving force. Just keep our foot on the pedal around scaling with quality. And then the second big priority is around fostering a global learning network, both across our network and beyond, around this question of, what are we learning about how to equip young people today to shape a better future for all of us? Like, what does that look like at the classroom level? What does it look like at the system level? Like, we want to foster the global learning necessary to ultimately help contribute to the transformation of education towards that purpose.
I can see that being a very long-term pursuit, almost one that never comes to an end, which is hopefully the case. When you think about partnerships into the future, what do you think, given your experience, leaders are missing about the value and power of entering into partnerships or networks?
Yeah. We think about this all the time. We didn't come from an international development kind of context, but we found ourselves somehow in that world. And when you ask, what are people missing? I think we are massively missing the power of networks and, as you say, partnerships as a path to both scaling social impact, but also to realizing locally led sustainable development. Like, there's a big localization movement. And thankfully, like, a big recognition that we need locally led development. But I think we're missing that. Yes, we want locally led development for sure, but local leaders want to be globally informed. There's no real desire to reinvent every wheel. So there's a place for networks that foster the kind of local leadership and equip that leadership with, the resources necessary to just really reach the highest levels. So I think we're just missing a huge lever for achieving the kind of sustainable development and societal progress we want to see.
I couldn't agree more. Where can people find more out about Teach for All and you, Wendy? Because I can imagine there will be people listening who will then pass this on to people who are teachers, who will then pass it on to people who are thinking about education, and it'll become quite something. Where should we send them?
Awesome. Well, send them to our website, teachforall.org, or to my LinkedIn, which is another good place to see what we're thinking about and writing about these days. Yeah.
Amazing. We'll put that all in the show notes. And I really do encourage, if you have an interest in education or where it's going, Wendy and her team are doing some extraordinary things, and it's very public. So the ability to learn what they're doing from the outside is quite profound. Wendy, let's go into our rapid fire questions. These are questions I ask every single guest. You won't be surprised to hear that some of the answers to these questions are very consistent across the board. But let's kick in. Question number 1, complete this sentence. Partnership is?
Partnership is deep relationship towards a shared purpose where the sum is greater than the parts.
What content are you loving right now? And it can be anything.
Yeah. I just read the galleys for a book that is going to come out in May, and I'm obsessed with it. It's called Moral Ambition by Rutger Bregman.
Okay.
And it's about how the most talented and promising people in society should really think very critically about what to do with their most precious asset, which is our time and energy. Like, we need to take on the world's biggest challenges. And it kind of challenges us all to do that.
Moral Ambition. I'm going to keep an eye out for that. That's coming out later this year.
Yeah, it's coming out in May.
Okay. I'm going to keep an eye out for that one. What's the worst piece of advice you've received and why?
Well, when I was trying to figure out whether to launch Teach for All, I mean, it was a big dilemma because I had my hands full at Teach for America, and I was making the rounds and consulting the board members of Teach for America. And at the time, I had 3 young kids and another one on the way. And
talk about having your hands full. That's
multiple people told me, you cannot do this. And they just thought it would be a disservice to my kids. And thankfully I met, and this is going to turn into a good advice, but I met the incredible gentleman who built BRAC, the world's largest NGO, Fazal Abed. I mean, incredible. And I asked him at the end of this meeting, let me ask you something, because I found out he was a grandfather through the course of the meeting. I said, do you think I can do this? I mean, he was running the world's largest nonprofit. And of course, he traveled everywhere. I said, do you think I can do this and be a responsible mom? And he literally did not skip a single second. Like, he was just like, yes. And honestly, it was the best decision I made, not only for my personal mission and everyone who's been touched by Teach for All, but also for my kids who gain so much from this. Like, they are global citizens. They've seen the world through my work. They, have seen what it's like to be part of something larger than yourself. So the worst advice I got was that this would be bad for my kids.
It's funny how much they take on board, how resilient they are, and actually more so than we think they are. The capacity to take on and process information is so great compared to, I think, where we were at the same age. It really is something else.
Yeah.
Wendy, when you see a new potential for a partnership, how do you convert that potential into action?
I think it always starts by just building the relationship, like a truly authentic, non-transactional relationship, like really trying to understand, and communicate with each other, like, what are we each really driving at? Because if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. Like, there's no time in the world for partnerships that are just, I don't know, for someone else's benefit. Like, we've got to, if there's a real reason, we need to really understand what's driving each other as a first step.
Life is too short for bad partnerships. There's no doubt about that. Final question. What is one thing you're deeply grateful for right now?
I think about this multiple times a day. I'm deeply grateful to do work that feels crucial to putting the world on a better trajectory. And as I think about all that is swirling here in the US and around the world right now, the antidotes to this are, leadership and leadership development, collective leadership, as we say, and education. Like, those have got to be 2 of the most crucial ingredients. So I just feel so grateful to work together with so many others who are all brought together by the same purpose and values and vision, to do all we can to keep our foot on the pedal, to grow our impact as exponentially as we can in the many years ahead.
Wendy, I have loved this conversation. It is so informative. We are going to link everywhere that we need to get people to get to know you and your organization as well. Thank you for spending the time and teaching me a lot about how an organization like yours grows. It's amazing.
Thank you. So thanks for helping us get the word out.
Of course. Well, again, if you are interested in education, which frankly we all should be, if you're not already, take a look at the show notes, get hold of all of those links, visit Wendy's LinkedIn and also the organization Teach for All. Wendy, I look forward to our next conversation. I don't think we can put all that we need to talk about in one episode here, so I look forward to our next one.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Before you go, I have a quick question for you. Do you worry that you're wasting time, money, and credibility with the wrong partnerships? It's exhausting to pretend everything's fine while secretly worrying that you've made the wrong call. You see others thriving with the right connections, and you're stuck wondering, if you're missing out on opportunities that could really elevate your business? Well, the good news is that ends today, because you can download my free partner calculator that instantly assesses if a partner is an ideal fit for your business. It'll give you the clarity and the confidence and the edge you've been looking for to secure high-value partnerships that not only finally unlock business growth, but also help you reclaim your time. The link is in the show notes. And I'm really glad you're here. I'm Coach Phil Hay Sinclair. I'll see you in the next episode.